It's Destro lock time, baby! You know it, you want it, you've seen it in the Race to World First doing some awesome work, and there are multiple reasons for that. What reasons, you ask? Well, stick around for the talents, gear, essences, rotation, and more, so you can get quick up and ready into your Destro lock so you can smash some dungeons and raids. And courtesy of Monaco from the WARLOCK Discord community, we have feedbacked and fact-checked all the info here, ready for you to consume in a properly manner. In this video, we will go over all the basics and fundamentals while setting you on the proper path for playing Destro lock in 8.3. Thanks to Monaco, one of the leading voices in the Destro community, we will hit you with all the right stuff. Starting on the first row, take Flashover. This baby gives you 2 charges of backdraft for every conflagrate used. It helps with mobility by simply reducing the cast time of spells. It's easy to use on top of it all as well. It might seem a bit less than Eradication, but there is no management involved, meaning no room for error, which ends up in more DPS output if you do indeed go otherwise. Second row, we have Reverse Entropy, making your spells grant you a 15% haste buff with a chance to proc, of course. This is another passive talent that works well into optimizing your rotation and even starts to excel in fights with 3 or more targets. There's not a lot to manage, but you could keep an eye on it since the haste buff lets you get out Chaos Bolts way faster, and this matters a lot in this movement-infested meta both in Raids and Mythic Plus. Warlock suffers enough as it is, and having to break so many Chaos Bolts will make you want to re-roll. Third row, we can address the mobility or lack thereof. Burning Rush will be your default choice, especially in Raids where the demand to move will be very consistent. Sure, you have Gate and another talent you can use, but this is on demand, no cooldown inferred, mini sprint. Hard to beat. Unless you have to stay still and take it like a man or his wife. Demon Skin is the alternative, increasing your passively generated Absorb Shield, making mandatory damage hit you for way less. Use this option when mobility is not an issue and you want to just sit there, look pretty, and smash some green meatballs at your enemies. Hopping down to row number 4, we take Cataclysm as the de facto option, which has been the case for the entire expansion. Aside from the obvious benefits of casting the spell, it essentially makes your rotation more efficient by generating shards in the background from one global. How is this, you ask? Well, aside single target, which is the highest DPS option on the row anyway, in AoE it applies Immolate to all targets, saving you the trouble of doing so individually, and each Immolate generates shards. While as an alternative to it, Fire and Brimstone would force you to manually cast Immolates and spam Incinerates, generating shards that way instead of, spamming Chaos Bolts quicker as you would with Cataclysm. Next up, the last utility row, Demonic Circle will be your default choice here. It requires you to know at least a little bit of the encounter so you can minimally predict where you need to be to put your circles properly. That will help you in dodging shit and minimizing downtime. An alternative is Mortal Coil, which can be chained with Havoc. This is a very situational option. You would want to use it to break unbreakable casts and CC mobs while also healing you for 20% of your HP. On the 6th row, your strongest option will be Grimoire of Supremacy, making your Infernal spell a beast of a DPS option. Since you can also reduce its base cooldown through an essence, this talent strength increases even more so. The base playstyle of Destro in BFA is do all your shit during your cooldowns and try very hard, while failing sometimes, to not be a wet noodle outside of them. Although we would want better AoE options, or at least more straightforward AoE options, Roaring Blaze is still very specific and underperforming Grimoire to this day. Maybe in Shadowlands. Last row, Dark Soul, no arguments here. Initially, it was difficult to time Dark Soul with Infernal due to each having different cooldown timers, but now they align better and offer you a unique strength. On demand, very high burst damage for 20+ seconds. Having a 20-second burst window is very useful for certain raid bosses, dungeon bosses, and generally phases in certain encounters where stuff needs to take as much damage as humanly possible in those 20 seconds. That's why it's pretty good to pair them up. Otherwise, if you don't have the necessity or you are not very sure how long you will be in a fight, popping Dark Soul on cooldown will be better if it means you getting one extra Dark Soul in before the encounter ends. And speaking of things that should end, self-plugs! Well, not really. We do want our channel to grow so we can make cooler and better stuff for you. Hitting those notification bells is one way of doing so, but you guys already know that. And maybe even more, if you like our stuff, of course. So, of course. Thank you. Stats. No doubt, if you looked up any other guide at any other point during this expansion, you would inevitably encounter someone, maybe even us, that told you to sim. Why? Well, because in BFA stats are more balanced and they scale off each other, meaning the more you get of one thing, the better the others will be for you. So there is somewhat of a balance required. Simming will always give you the correct answer, but we understand that's not for everyone. So go for mastery and haste with crit and versatility closing in on the bottom. This is a general stat priority, taking into consideration you have some of the best gear in the game. This doesn't mean crit and verse are bad and you should not ignore them, but rather keep them in mind once you get more haste and mastery, with the idea that each new item you equip will skew the balance between the stats. As an example, when I simulate my stat priority, I get something like this, which differs vastly from the norm. What this means is not that the priority is wrong, but as long as you don't get something stupid like 3000 mastery, 500 haste, 500 crit and 0 versatility, because who wants more healing, am I right? You should be fine. Taking the argument from the stats, we can essentially make an informed decision about which consumables to use. Consumables as in, a Cord of Mastery enchant for the ring and Masterful Sea Current as the gem. You will use these the most and they supplement your base mastery needs, which of course can be replaced by their respective counterparts if you so decide to choose your main different stat, the secondary stat that is. As for the weapon, the universal enchant, regardless of stat, will be your Machinist Brilliance, since it procs intellect and a chunk of your main secondary stat, which I think you would want anyway. Your potion needs will depend on the number of targets you are fighting if you want to be efficient, with Unbridled Fury for single target scenarios, Empowered Proximity for AoE, and Superior Battle Potion of Intellect for generally any fight, but performing better with more targets. Feast will be better since the bigger boost in intellect will surpass the secondary stat boost from foods like Abyssal Fried Risole, which you can still take if feasts are not available. When gearing with Azurite armor, things will be a bit easier since you want to get the highest eye level piece. This will reduce your mean maxing, but there are still a few that will be better to get. Since the majority of the boss fights have adds or cleave fights, there isn't a big argument in speccing purely to single target. Take one Crashing Chaos and one Chaotic Inferno. They buff your Chaos Bolt's base damage, especially when your Infernal pops, and it will, from your essence, which we will go over in a bit. Get Flashpoint stacked up to 3 times if you can. This gives you a big haste boost when your target is above 80% HP. It works better the more targets you have and makes Cataclysm good in AoE as well. Even though it sounds mediocre on bosses, most of them spawn full HP adds throughout the fight, which you can use to get that haste proc, so there's very little downside to taking this. Pair this up with Roiling Havoc stacked as much as you can, making your Havoc window something to really think about. Outside of these, you can take Bursting Flare in any other available slots, Heart of Darkness if you are raiding and have the corruption to proc it, or generic stat traits like Blightborn Infusion, which works well in all situations. For essences, there are 2 main majors to consider. Vision of Perfection is the all-rounder good in all situations and your de facto choice in Mythic Plus. This will proc your Infernal, randomly I know, but the proc chance increased this patch. Pair this up with the 2 Chaos Bolt traits I mentioned and your Chaos Bolts will still hit decently outside the major DPS cooldowns. Not to mention you get the big Infernal benefits every time it procs, meaning once almost every minute you are in combat. The alternative is Memory of Lucid Dreams for specific single target fights where you really want to pump big Chaos Bolts during your 20-second DPS window. It will work into your rotation, providing you with a massive shard regeneration, allowing you to spam back to back to back Chaos Bolts like a fucking maniac. Yeah, still a poet. As for minors, start with whichever is not your major between Vision of Perfection and Memory of Lucid Dreams. Focusing Iris is a good option in single target since the stacks fall off when you switch targets. Formless Void rank 3 is a very good option in raids where people will launch their essences at different times, giving you a high uptime on the intellect buff. Otherwise, you can go with Breath of the Dying since you can only have one of the new essences, and Breath does really well even at lower ranks. For AoE and Mythic Plus, you can consider Conflict and Strife and Purification Protocol as viable third options. Conflict is just a constant versatility buff, can't go wrong there, while Protocol is good damage on a lot of targets. So there are a few options to choose from, hoping you already farmed most of them in 8.2. You did, didn't you? You didn't. You did, right? Right? Sucks if not. For your trinkets, your first one should be a strong on-use options, and depending on whether you played the raid in 8.2 or are willing to play it now, a Jara's Font of Power is very good as a first option. This is if you have at least a Heroic Eye level 1. Otherwise, you can simply go with Manifesto of Madness from ny'alotha. Both really good on-use options which work best for cooldown focus specs such as Destro, allowing you to pump hard during your DPS window since that's when you will pop them. As for your second option, you can go with the Vita Charge Titan Shard from Raden, the Dragon Scale from Rathian, or the Obsidian Claw from Maut. The set trinket is not that amazing as it would be for other classes, so there is no real worth in aiming for it. You can also pick up any on-use trinkets from Mythic dungeons as alternatives if you are unlucky with the raid drops. There are two weapons that drop from the raid that you can potentially get. That brings the Infinite Stars Corruption effect, and Eye Stalk of Il'gynoth that gives you Ineffable Truth. Infinite Stars is an effect that works purely in single target, and if you have to hit anything else, or if you just have a second target, be it boss or add, it will start to heavily lose its value since it's supposed to stack its debuff and proc higher and higher numbers, which of course doesn't happen if you keep changing targets and getting it to proc on something else, and the targets will be hit randomly without your control, so no. Otherwise, it's not too bad. Ineffable Truth brings your Infernal cooldown to about 2 minutes, which is not bad, aligns good with Dark Soul, but the corruption cost might be too much to be worth it though since there are better alternatives. If nothing else is available, you can keep this without cleansing it. What you really want though is specific effects. You might have heard of the OP effects that were probably nerfed by the time this video is out. Echoing Void, Twilight Devastation, and Infinite Stars are not that great for Warlock, and you end up paying a hefty price for some effects that will actually not work most of the time. Instead, what you want to aim for is Haste, Mastery, or Versatility procs as a default. These are good stats to have, will give you overall better DPS, and if you have Flashpoint stacked as well, you can aim for the Extra Haste from all sources Corruption effect. Other than this, judging your corruption will be based on you, how apt you are at juggling the debuffs and what you get in exchange for them. Ideally, as an immobile caster, you would want to stay safely under 40 corruption to avoid the Grand Delusion's debuff. Although some players go as high as 100, but you'll make no friends that way. Trust me. I know. You start a fight with any castable trinkets and a pre-pot. Cast an Incinerate before the pool and a Cataclysm shortly after. Summon your Infernal, use Conflagrate twice, use 2 Chaos Bolts, cast Incinerate and again, and cast the Conflagrate, cast another Chaos Bolt, pool resources and pop Dark Soul with other trinkets and racials and Memory of Lucid Dreams here if you have it. Now, just dump as many Chaos Bolts as you possibly can before your cooldowns drop off. The main idea here is that when your Infernal has 20 seconds remaining, you want to pump your major damage in. That's because Dark Soul lasts 20 seconds and Chaos Bolt's damage builds up the more shards you spend, so the biggest Chaos Bolt will be the last one you cast before all of them drop off. Depending on your haste and crit rating, you'll generate more or fewer shards overall, so don't cap on anything during this time. Outside your major cooldowns, the priority is simple. Make sure Immolate is up and refresh it before it drops. Cast Chaos Bolts when you are about to cap on shards. Cast Cataclysm on cooldown. Cast Conflagrates to prevent capping on charges. Cast Conflagrates again to generate shards and fill in with Incinerate. The idea here is to maximize the value of your shards since you might get some lucky stat procs, Infernal procs, or other similar stuff, and it's good to have some resources banked for such an occasion. Another rule of thumb is that your Immolate can have its cast refresh with Cataclysm every other cast, meaning you refresh it once normally, then with Cataclysm, then normally, and so on. In multi-target scenarios, you still want Immolate on your main target. cast Rain of Fire if you have 3 targets and Havoc is on cooldown, or cast on 5 targets and more if Havoc is available. Prevent shard capping with Chaos Bolts otherwise. Cataclysm on cooldown, use Havoc when available, cast Chaos Bolts further down the priority list, use Conflagrates to generate shards, fill in with Incinerates to generate shards, or if nothing else is available. The AoE part is a bit iffy here. On a small number of targets, it's better to spend shards on Chaos Bolts and Chaos Bolts cleaved with Havoc exclusively, following the rule above, and filling in with Rain of Fire when the other options are not available. It's not amazing, but it's the best you got. This guide focuses on the basics and fundamentals and is good to get you really quick into your Warlock and to some raids and dungeons. And we have Motoko to thank for that, for helping us feedback our guide and fact-checking and explaining certain things that I personally did not know. Who is Motoko, you ask? Well, it's currently the admin of the Warlock Discord channel and a very high and strong voice in the Warlock community. And Motoko also has the Icy Veins guide for Destro Warlock, which he keeps updated as often as he humanly can, which is pretty good. And you should check that out, especially if you want more advanced things about Destro Warlock that we cannot offer in your video. And also make sure to check the Warlock Discord community, the link should be down below, where you can talk with a lot of good Destro Warlock players and get some more insight on the spec, maybe clarify certain mistakes that you might be making, because, you know, that's how we all improve as players. And of course, we cannot end the video without a shout out to our Patreons. God damn it, you beautiful bastards. We love you so much. Thank you for supporting, and for anyone who still wants to support us a little bit more, check the details down below. We have our Patreon link with some goodies on the side, if you know what I'm saying. Thank you very much for watching the video, hope it helped, and we'll catch you in the next one.